Today we have a special treat for you. 2 stories, each one of a child that went missing for years, without a trace. In each case, it took a stunning turn of events, and undoubtedly a fair bit of luck for the mystery to be solved, leaving the parents and the community traumatized for life. The second story will most certainly make your skin crawl. The people affected thought they would never know what happened, but now you can listen along and find out. But just before we get into it, just a quick word from the sponsor of this video, Liposlend. Liposlend is a revolutionary new one-of-a-kind solution that supports the body's natural molecular liposuction process, stopping the fat vessels from growing, multiplying, and feeding more fat cells. Whether you want to lose weight or simply maintain your current weight, now you can do so safely, without having to go through tortuous diets that fail the minute you stop, or pumping your body full of harmful chemicals that do more harm than good. Don't just get into shape for the fast-approaching holiday season. Stay in shape and remain healthy for the rest of your life. We included a link in the description below, so you can check it out for yourself. Now let's get into our first of the 2 stories right away. On a crisp autumn day in a small, sleepy town, the sun cast long shadows on the ground as children hurried home from school. Laughter echoed through the streets, a carefree soundtrack to the end of the day. But then in an instant, the tranquility shattered. 5-year-old Jamie Thompson, with bright blue eyes and a cherubic smile, never made it home. As dusk fell, Jamie's parents began to worry. He was always punctual, always where he was supposed to be. When darkness wrapped the town in its cold embrace, panic set in. The Thompson family gathered on their porch, their eyes scanning the streets for any sign of their son. "He must be playing with his friends," they whispered, desperately clinging to hope. But as the hours dragged on, reality sank in like a heavy stone in their chests. "Call the police," Jamie's father croaked, his voice trembling. The sound of sirens pierced the night air, signaling the beginning of a nightmare. Neighbors rushed to their aid, forming search parties with flashlights and trembling hearts, illuminating the path where Jamie once played. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. As the search widened, tension escalated. Helicopters buzzed overhead, and search dogs sniffed at the ground, following the scent of innocence that now hung heavy in the air. The community united in their determination. But the hours turned into days, and still Jamie was nowhere to be found. "We're going to find him," the police assured the family. But the flicker of hope began to dim. Jamie's parents, clinging to each other, felt the weight of despair settle in as they realized that their world had irrevocably changed. The last image of their child, laughing and carefree, would haunt them forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The investigation unfolded like a twisted tale, rife with false leads and dead ends. Detectives pored over every detail, witnesses interviewed, alibis checked, and yet the trail grew colder. With each passing day, the town's fear morphed into suspicion. "Who could do this?" whispered neighbors, casting wary glances at one another. Rumors spread like wildfire. "Did you hear about the man with the red truck?" A voice would hiss at the grocery store, eyes darting around. A shadowy figure lurked at the edge of the investigation, but each tip led investigators in circles, never closer to the truth. The community grieved, but their anger festered, turning friends into strangers. Time marched on, but Jamie's absence echoed in the hearts of many. The anniversary of his disappearance became a somber event, marked by candlelight vigils and desperate pleas for information. "Help us find our boy," Jamie's mother cried, her voice cracking as the flickering flames mirrored her unyielding hope. As the years passed, the world outside moved on, but the Thompsons remained locked in their grief. The empty bedroom that once belonged to Jamie stood as a painful reminder of a life interrupted. "He could be out there," they would whisper, holding on to the belief that he was still alive somewhere, waiting to come home. The psychological toll weighed heavily on the family. Jamie's mother grew distant, trapped in a haze of longing and sorrow. Jamie's siblings, too young to remember, felt the heavy silence at family gatherings, the unspoken void where laughter should be. "Why don't we talk about him?" they would ask, eyes wide with confusion, prompting a mix of sadness and anger from their parents. Every anniversary became a double-edged sword, a time of remembrance yet also a painful reminder of their unending heartache. A local psychologist began offering support, emphasizing the importance of hope. But for the Thompsons, hope felt like a cruel joke. Yet, as the years went by, a flicker of resilience sparked within them. "We need to keep looking," Jamie's father said one evening, staring into the distance as if searching for answers in the night sky. Then, as if fate had decided to intervene, a retired detective named Alan Morgan revisited the case almost 20 years after Jamie's disappearance. He pored over old files, combing through evidence with a fresh perspective. "There has to be something we missed," he muttered to himself, fueled by a newfound determination. His quiet obsession ignited a spark of hope, a potential breakthrough lurking in the shadows. As if the universe conspired to bring forth change, Detective Morgan uncovered something astonishing. A witness had come forward, one who had been hesitant to speak for fear of retribution. They had seen a man in a red truck near the school, but it wasn't just any man. This one had a history, a name that sent chills down the spines of those who knew. The moment the police revealed this new information, the air crackled with tension. "We need to find him," Detective Morgan stated, urgency edging his voice. Every piece of the puzzle was finally beginning to fit, but it was just the beginning of a long, arduous journey toward truth. Investigators tracked down the man with the red truck, their hearts pounding as they approached the house where he lived. With every knock on the door, the weight of the past pressed heavily upon them. The community held its breath as the drama unfolded. News vans gathered outside, their cameras capturing the tension. When they finally confronted him, the atmosphere shifted. The man denied everything, a mix of anger and fear flashing across his face. But as the detectives pressed, he began to crack, revealing fragmented truths that painted a horrifying picture. "I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice faltering. The truth was darker than anyone had imagined, sending shockwaves through the community. The revelation forced the Thompsons to grapple with a new reality, one filled with anger, betrayal, and an unsettling closure. They were finally piecing together what had happened to Jamie, yet the pain of knowing brought a new set of burdens. "I can't believe this," Jamie's mother wept, a mixture of relief and sorrow flooding her heart. The community, too, began to heal. The shadows that had lingered for years were starting to lift, yet the scars would remain forever etched in their memories. The climactic moment arrived when the trial began. Tension filled the courtroom, heavy and thick as the family sat in the front row, eyes locked on the man who had taken their child. "This is it," they whispered to one another, holding tightly to their hopes of justice. As the evidence unfolded, the details became a chilling narrative. The man's testimony painted a grotesque picture, revealing the sinister circumstances surrounding Jamie's disappearance. With every word, the Thompsons felt their hearts shatter anew, each revelation a dagger plunged into their already wounded souls. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, the man continued to weave a web of lies, desperately trying to escape the truth. "You're lying!" a voice echoed from the back of the room, a family member breaking the silence. The emotional turmoil reached a boiling point, and the courtroom erupted in chaos, each member fighting for their own version of justice. As the jury deliberated, the Thompsons felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. "Will we finally get justice for Jamie?" they asked one another, fear and hope colliding in their hearts. Then, finally, the moment of truth arrived. The jury returned, their expressions solemn as they read the verdict. The family held their breath, a collective gasp escaping as the word guilty echoed in the courtroom. The man was sentenced to life in prison, his fate sealed, but the scars of their loss would never truly fade. In the wake of the trial, the Thompsons faced a new reality. During the trial, the confession revealed that Jamie was in fact murdered by the man in the red van shortly after the abduction. The suspect ultimately confessed to abducting Jamie, providing chilling details about the events surrounding Jamie's disappearance. Advancements in DNA analysis over the period of 2 decades had also made it possible for authorities to link the subject to the crime. The town breathed a sigh of relief, but the emotional healing process had only just begun. However, despite the positive outcome achieved by finding and prosecuting the offender, Jamie's body still remains missing. In the end, the family decided to honor Jamie's memory by establishing a foundation dedicated to helping other families of missing children. "We can't let his story be forgotten," Jamie's father declared during a memorial event, his voice steady despite the pain etched on his face. With each passing year, the foundation grew, providing resources, support, and hope to those still searching for their loved ones. Do you know anyone that has gone through a similar ordeal? Can you even imagine what it must be like for those left behind to live through this? Let us know in the comments below. Now, if you feel a bit saddened by the outcome of this story, the next one might just lift your spirits a bit. So let's get into story number 2. This one takes us all the way to a town just outside Minneapolis in late 2009 and has a truly mind-blowing outcome. It was a typical afternoon in the town of Maplewood. The streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by, and 10-year-old Alex Taylor was just finishing his walk home from school. He kicked at a few pebbles as he hummed a tune under his breath. His mom had warned him about taking shortcuts, but today, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to explore a narrow alleyway he'd always seen but never entered before. The alley was darker and quieter than he expected, with tall brick walls casting heavy shadows. Suddenly, he heard the low rumble of a van approaching. He glanced back, squinting against the glare of its headlights. Before he could react, a door slid open. Rough hands grabbed him and a cloth pressed tightly over his face. His mind screamed, but his voice was muted by the thick fabric. Everything around him faded, swallowed by darkness. The last thing he heard was the faint sound of his backpack hitting the ground and a hollow silence enveloping the alley. When Alex woke up, he was lying on a cold, hard surface. He tried to sit up, but his limbs felt like lead. He blinked several times, struggling to adjust to the dim light around him. The room smelled of mildew, and the air was thick and stale. He shivered and glanced down, realizing his wrists and ankles were bruised and raw. He took in his surroundings: concrete walls, a heavy metal door with a small, grated window, and no sign of a clock or window to tell him the time. He crawled to the door, peering out through the grate. Nothing but darkness and silence greeted him. His heart hammered in his chest. He called out, but his voice barely echoed. He pounded on the door until his fists ached. Someone had taken him, dragged him away from everything he knew, and locked him in this prison. But who and why? He strained his ears, hoping for any sound, any sign of another human being, but all he heard was his own breathing, harsh and uneven. "Let me out!" he screamed, the desperation rising in his voice. But no one answered. Time passed slowly. Alex had no way of knowing if it was day or night. He tried to keep track by counting seconds in his head, but he kept losing count, falling into a state of dazed confusion. Then, one night, he heard it, a soft, muffled sob from somewhere beyond his cell. He pressed his ear against the wall. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. The sobbing stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Had he imagined it? He strained to listen, holding his breath. And then he heard it again, a whimper, low and broken. "Can you hear me?" he asked, louder this time. But no response came. Alex's throat tightened. Was he alone? Was he losing his mind? He called out again and again, but only silence answered. He pressed his face against the cold concrete, feeling the vibrations of his own heartbeat. If there was someone else, why wouldn't they answer? He began to wonder if the voices he heard were real at all. Determined not to be forgotten in this concrete cage, Alex spent hours exploring every inch of his cell. He pushed against the walls, tapped for hollow sounds, and searched for any weakness he could exploit. Days later, he found it, a small hidden gap in the corner behind the rusty bed frame. He crouched down, heart pounding with excitement, and pried at the loose bricks until his fingers bled. Finally, one brick gave way. It wasn't much, a narrow opening, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. But it was something. Alex took a deep breath and began to push himself into the gap. His body scraped against the rough edges, tearing his shirt and cutting his skin. He clenched his teeth, holding back a cry as he inched forward. He was almost through when the sound of heavy boots echoed outside his cell door. Panic surged through him. The warden was coming. Should he push forward and risk being caught, or retreat and lose his only chance at freedom? His heart raced as he made his decision. He pulled himself back into the cell just as the door swung open. A massive figure stood in the doorway, blocking the light. The warden, a grim-faced man with cold, unfeeling eyes, glared down at him. He was a hulking presence, the kind that made even the shadows seem to cower. The warden stepped inside, dropping a stale piece of bread on the floor. He didn't speak. He never spoke. He didn't have to. His silence was a threat, a reminder of who held the power. Alex's eyes darted to the set of keys hanging loosely from the warden's belt. The keys shimmered in the dim light, sparking a new idea. Every move the warden made was deliberate. He picked up Alex's discarded shirt and examined it, his eyes narrowing at the sight of fresh blood. Then, without a word, he turned and left, locking the door behind him. Alex sat trembling, but his mind was already working. He began to observe the warden's routine, noting every time he entered, how long he stayed, and when he'd drop his guard. The keys. He had to get those keys. The sobs came again one night. This time Alex didn't hesitate. "Can you hear me?" he called softly, pressing his ear against the wall. There was a pause, then a faint whisper. "Yes, I'm here." Relief washed over Alex. He wasn't alone. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Clara," came the reply, weak but clear. "I've been here a long time. There's a way out, but it's dangerous." Hope and fear collided in Alex's chest. "Tell me," he urged. "There's a passage behind the walls," she whispered, "but it's guarded by something worse than the warden." Alex's heart sank. Worse than the warden? But if there was a chance to escape, he had to take it. He couldn't stay here forever. Alex and Clara exchanged information for days, working out an escape plan. The night came when they finally made their move. Alex signaled with a series of taps, and Clara responded. They coordinated their actions, hoping the warden wouldn't notice. They crawled through the narrow passage, inching along with only the sound of their breath echoing around them. The air grew colder, and an oppressive darkness enveloped them. Every creak of the walls felt like a warning. Then, a loud crash reverberated behind them. "Go!" Clara urged, pushing Alex forward. He hesitated, torn between saving himself or going back for her, but the fear of capture was too great. He pushed on, running blindly through the darkness until he stumbled out into an unfamiliar tunnel. Clara's scream echoed behind him, and then silence. Alone in the maze of underground tunnels, Alex felt a crushing weight of guilt and fear. He didn't know which way to go. Every turn led to a dead end. Every door he tried was locked. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and whispers filled his ears, taunting, teasing, drawing him further into despair. "Clara!" he called, but no one answered. He wandered aimlessly, growing weaker with each step. He began to think the prison wanted to keep him forever, trapping him in its endless corridors, twisting his mind until he forgot who he was. Stumbling upon a room filled with rusted equipment, Alex's hope flickered. In the center stood a control panel covered in dust. He didn't know what any of the buttons did, but he pressed them anyway, pulling levers and twisting knobs. Alarms blared and lights flashed. The warden's footsteps thundered down the hallway. Alex worked frantically, his hands shaking. The warden burst in, a look of rage on his face. They struggled, Alex fighting with every ounce of strength left in his battered body. He grabbed a sharp piece of metal and slashed at the warden's leg. The man roared in pain, giving Alex just enough time to scramble for the door. He ran, the warden's shouts echoing behind him. Alex burst through the final exit and into the blinding sunlight. He blinked, dazed and disoriented, as he stumbled into a dense forest. He pushed through the underbrush until he found a road. Almost immediately, a truck driver stopped, shock spreading across his face as he saw Alex's torn clothes and blood-streaked skin. Where am I?" Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. The driver called for help, but as he did, Alex overheard a chilling report on the truck's radio. Authorities continue to search for missing children in the area. Several cases spanning the past decade, but none have ever been found alive. The driver glanced at Alex, concern etched into his features. "Kid, what's your name?" "Alex," he replied softly. The driver's eyes widened. "Alex Taylor? You've been missing for 3 years." Alex stared blankly, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. He was no longer the child he'd been when he was taken. He was a ghost, a forgotten memory brought back to life. 3 years, he whispered, his voice hollow. The world blurred around him, the nightmare far from over. As the driver spoke into his radio, Alex closed his eyes, wondering if he'd ever truly escaped the prison that had taken his soul. That same day, Alex was reunited with his parents. There were cries of joy, many tears of relief, and a frantic scurry to get to the abandoned building with the remaining missing children. Thankfully, they were all saved. The warden was tracked down 2 days later and arrested, but unfortunately he proved to be severely mentally handicapped, and as a result, the main perpetrator or perpetrators behind the kidnappings were never found. The case still remains open. Now, how do you think Alex's life will change now that he's free? I'd love to hear your ideas in the comments. And remember, we post new stories at least every Wednesday and Sunday, so subscribe and join the clan. and check out the story on your screen right now. This boy defied all the odds thanks to his loyal two brutes that stayed by his side throughout his entire 66-hour ordeal lost in the most dangerous place ever, the untamed African bush. As always, much love and stay safe. Till next time, cheers.